Hello, welcome to my channel, and today we'll be reviewing the famous Sigma 18-35 f1.8 art lens for its suitability on the Canon EOS R7, a 32 megapixel APS-C camera, and comparing this lens's performance to some newer prime lenses, as well as some of the recent kit lenses as a bonus. The Sigma 18-35 is a fairly old lens, and zoom lenses in general tend to perform worse at equivalent focal lengths than prime lenses. So let's find out just how well this venerable zoom can hold up to modern-ish mid-range primes. As always, if you want to skip straight to certain tests or conclusions, see the chapter below or consult the timestamps in the description. First, let's introduce our contestants here in more detail, starting with the star of the show. The Sigma 18-35mm f1.8 DC HSM Art is a high-end, bright aperture zoom designed specifically for APS-C DSLR cameras and was released in April 2013 for a variety of camera mounts. The version I have here is for Canon's EF mount, which can be used with modern mirrorless RF or EFM mount cameras by using an adapter. I have Canon's official EF to RF adapter here to minimize potential compatibility issues. Since these adapters contain no glass, they do not affect image quality and merely place the glass as far from the camera sensor as it was designed for. It can still be purchased new for $700 to $800 or around $500 to $600 used. The zoom range on a Canon APS-C 1.6x crop covers a full frame equivalent of 29 to 56 millimeters. This lens features hypersonic motor, or HSM, autofocus drivers, which promises focusing that is swift, though not quiet. The zoom is internal, which means your balance will not be thrown off while tripod mounted, but also means the lens does not store compactly. The very bright f1.8 aperture can be used at all zoom lengths, unlike most other zoom lenses which have variable apertures. This comes at the cost of size and weight though, and this lens weighs a whopping 28.6 ounces and measures 4.8 inches long, longer and far heavier than the competitors here. It also feels quite top heavy when attached to my R7, which is currently Canon's largest APS-C mirrorless body. On the flip side, this lens is by far the most solidly built in this test. They're surprisingly not weather sealed, and the only one that came new with a usable hood and carrying case. The zoom and focus rings are fairly wide and very smooth, and we get an analog zoom scale. Note that this lens does not feature stabilization, and if your camera body is lacking an in-body stabilization, or IBIS, you may be forced to use a tripod for low shutter speeds in video. Firmware on this lens can only be updated and checked by the Sigma USB dock, sold separately. Note that Canon, at least, you cannot use in-camera correction profiles for the Sigma 18-35 unless the firmware is at least version 2.0, and the IBIS will be glitchy as well. The RF 24mm f1.8 Macro IS STM is a full-frame mid-range prime released in July 2022. It features a stepping motor, or STM, autofocus drive, which makes for quieter but slower focusing. The lens is stabilized, supposedly up to 5.5 stops worth, and a bit more if the camera body has IBIS. Despite the macro moniker, it only magnifies 1 to 2, or half-life size. It goes for around $600 new, around $500 used or refurbished, and rarely down to $300 during refurbished sales. On APS-C, the focal length is equivalent to 39mm full frame. Though very plasticky and not weather sealed, it's still reasonably sturdy and has a separate focus ring and control ring and a dedicated on-off switch for autofocus. The manual focus ring turns smoothly, but the control ring is clicky. At 9 ounces, it's fairly lightweight, and at 2.9 inches long, this is a decently compact lens, despite being made for full frame and bearing stabilization. It does not come with a hood, which is very petty on Canon's part for a lens that costs $600. This lens quickly became my go-to for low-light indoor video, and the vibrant colors, sharp imagery, and pleasant bokeh this thing can produce has made it a favorite of mine. How will it stand up against the legendary Sigma 18-35 though? And with a redundant focal length, will it end up on my to-sell list? The EFS 35mm f2.8 Macro IS STM was Canon's last EFS lens, and among their last EF lenses in general, being released in June 2017. Unusually, it bears a built-in LED ring light around the glass, powered by the camera itself and adjustable with the two elements. An STM autofocus system is again used here, and the lens is stabilized with a system that supposedly also corrects for lateral shake. Unlike the RF 24mm, this is a true 1:1 macro lens, a huge difference that you will see later in this video. This is tough to find new, but you can still find it used for around $300. On APS-C, the focal length is equivalent to 56mm full frame. Again, we have a plasticky and unsealed body, but we do have a smooth focus ring and a dedicated switches for stabilization and manual focus. It's quite light at 6.7 ounces and pretty compact at 2.6 inches long. However, as an EFS lens, you'll need to use the EF to RF adapter to use on R series bodies, which adds more length and weight. While it does technically come with a metal hood, it's more for expanding the size of filters the lens can take than actually providing shade, and also covers the macro lights. I love this lens for floral and unflighted insect close-ups, but the focal length is too short for more wary creatures and not wide enough for general purpose and scenery. If not for the magnification and the useful lights, this would already have been sold off. Can its unique features and image quality justify its existence against the Sigma 18-35? Finally, the two RFS kit lenses, the 18-45mm f4.5 to 6.3 IS STM, and 18-150mm f3.5 to 6.3 IS STM. These were released in June 2022, alongside the also new R10 and R7 respectively. The 18-45 comes optionally bundled with the R100, R50, and R10, and can be purchased separately new for a whopping $300. Can also be found easily used for under $80. The 18-150mm comes optionally bundled with the R10 or R7 and runs $500 new if you can find it in stock, or $300 to $400 used. Both of these have variable apertures, and neither reach anywhere near the brightness of the Sigma 18-35, but both overlap in focal length, and beginner RFS camera body owners are likely to have one, so I've added these to the comparison so we can see how much of an improvement a so-called proper lens can be over that of the kit lens. The results might just surprise you. Back to the introductions, both lenses are quite plasticky, with even the lens mount being plastic. However, both at 4.6 and 11 ounces respectively, and at 1.7 inches and 5 inches in length respectively, are quite small and light for their focal lengths, and especially so considering both feature lens stabilization. Being external zooms though, they lengthen as you zoom out. The 18-45 covers a 29 to 72mm full frame equivalent range, while the 18-150 covers a whopping 29 to 240mm. Unfortunately, the aforementioned variable aperture rears its ugly head while zooming, and these darken pretty quickly, as seen in this table. Neither are weather sealed, or come with a hood or carrying case, and neither has any external buttons or scales. Both use the control rings as the manual focus ring, though you can still customize it. The R10 and R7 have an external switch on the front of the bodies for switching between manual and autofocus when using lenses such as this, but currently all other R series bodies require you to change the focus method in the menus instead. The 18 to 150 can reach a magnification of nearly half-life size, almost macro capability. These kit lenses are natural candidates for a professional lens like the Sigma 18 to 35 to replace, but are their benefits enough to warrant their continued use? Let's begin the comparison in earnest with an image quality test. I attempted to replicate the scene here equally with a variety of focal lengths, from 18mm to 35mm. However, due to the size differences of the various lenses, there will be perspective changes despite my best efforts. All images were taken with the Canon EOS R7 at ISO 100 and auto shutter speed to match the exposure. A tripod, electronic shutter, and remote shooting was used to eliminate human and shutter shake, and lens stabilization where present was turned off as well. One-shot spot focus was used consistently and aimed at the cardinal's visible eye on each photo. White balance was set to auto white priority, and picture style was set to a customized landscape variant. All available lens correction profiles were used for the relevant lenses in the post-processing software, ON1 RAW 2023, but no other edits were done to these RAW files before being exported to full-size JPEGs for use with this video. Now we'll discuss what we just saw. Bear in mind that this is just my own observations and opinions, and you may have differing ones. Starting with the Sigma 18 to 35 at its widest focal length and aperture, we see some pretty good sharpness both centrally and in the corners. Note that the unusual brightness of the corners was thanks to the lens correction profile. Stopping down to f2.8, we see a substantial boost in sharpness centrally, and a bit in the corners too. Bokeh-wise, the light spears are looking a bit more angular at f2.8, though the background is still nicely blurred in both. At f3.5, we can make a direct comparison with the RFS 18 to 150mm kit lens. Surprisingly, the 18 to 150 is actually a little bit sharper centrally, though the Sigma in my opinion has a slight edge in the corners. The kit lens's light spears are less angular as well, and more pleasing in my view. At f4.5, we can add the RFS 18 to 45mm kit lens to the competition, which seems to be a bit worse than the Sigma centrally, while the 18 to 150 maintains a slight lead. The 18 to 45 also has a noticeably lower contrast, which will be a theme throughout these tests. In the corners, the 18 to 45 does very poorly, while the Sigma takes the lead. The new kit lens also introduces ugly light spears, and the bokeh itself is just a little bit unattractive. I personally still favor the 18-150 here. We'll stop down to f5 to allow the 18-45 a chance to redeem itself, but the story doesn't change. Moving on to 24mm, we can compare the RF 24mm prime at both f1.8 and 2.8. Centrally, the Sigma is actually sharper at both apertures, and the corners are superior as well. Bokeh-wise though, I personally prefer the prime lens here, especially the light spears. At f4 we can add the RFS 18-150, which once again has a slight lead in central sharpness. The prime, surprisingly, is a bit behind both. In the corners though, the Sigma again takes the lead. The RF24's light spears are finally starting to look a little bit angular, but generally I still have a slight preference for this lens's bokeh over the kit and Sigma. Finally, we add the cheap 18-45 at f5, where it takes a close 4th place in central sharpness. The Sigma and 18-150 are very close, with the prime a bit behind. In the corners though, the Sigma again fares the best, while the 18-150 and RF24 vie for 2nd place. The 18-45 is just horrendous here, although its light spears are an improvement over its 18mm performance. The other 3 lenses are producing similar results here, but my favor goes towards the prime and 18-150. Stopping down to f5.6 doesn't change things much. Now we've reached the longest focal length of the Sigma and can compare to the EFS 35mm prime at f2.8. The Sigma is noticeably softer wide open, but at 2.8 it's pretty close to the prime. In the corners, I actually prefer the prime, but looking at its bokeh, the light spears suffer from heavy cat eye. Stopping down to f4.5 allows us to bring back the 18-150, who this time is a little less sharp than the Sigma. The prime is the clear leader centrally though, and in my opinion wins at the corners as well. Its cat eye bokeh is mostly gone at this aperture, and the 18-150 is finally starting to look unattractive to me here. If we stop down to a very dark f6.3, we can bring back the 18-45, who still has contrast issues but is only a bit softer than its big brother. The Sigma takes a close 2nd place behind the prime. In the corners, the Sigma finally takes a clear lead, while the 18-45 is again the worst performer here. None of these look great here in my opinion, but I'd say the 18-150 is the least offensive. Except for the Sigma, the rest of the lenses have very comfortable minimum focus distances of around half a foot, while the Sigma's is nearly a full foot. Even with this further working distance, I still have found it easy to get subjects in focus with this lens. The maximum magnification, however, varies wildly with these lenses, as we will see in the following test. Here, I attempt to focus as closely as possible on one of the Blue Jay's eyes using manual focus, with a bonus autofocus attempt for the RFS 18-45. Next up, I have added a short flaring and sunstar comparison on an afternoon sun through tree leaves. As I have little knowledge on this subject, I invite you to voice your own observations in the comment section below. All of these lenses, aside from the Sigma 18-35, bear stabilization in the lens itself. The Canon R7 I'm testing on here features stabilization from the camera body, known as IBIS. As mentioned earlier, this IBIS works with the Sigma 18-35 if you have upgraded firmware. But how does it compare to the other lenses? If you have a camera body without IBIS, such as the R100, R50, or R10, you can expect this lens to behave as you see it in the IBIS off segments. Every lens in this comparison has competent enough autofocus. However, the noise they produce varies wildly. Here, using the R7's internal microphone with the noise reduction features off, I allow each lens to autofocus in video servo mode in a closed walk-in closet, the closest thing I have to a soundproof room available.
1845. Our F150. RF24. EFS35. Sigma.
The two RFS kit lenses and the EFS35 macro are practically silent here, while the RF24 creaks audibly. The Sigma 18-35, however, produces loud and abundant clicks as it focuses, which is very unfavorable if you intend to use this lens for video. How audible is it in real-world situations with ambient noise, however? Let's test drive it outdoors and also inside a lightly busy museum. The Sigma was still audible outdoors, though to a much lesser extent, but inside the museum I could barely hear it. If you're using a hot shoe or lavalier microphone, you could potentially eliminate this noise entirely. Tangentially related, note that changing the aperture of the 18-35 is noisy as well, and results in an obnoxious light flickering effect, something no other lens I own does. Color fringing, also known as chromatic aberration, is a phenomenon of lenses that can potentially ruin photos or videos. There are different types of chromatic aberration that I'll be testing specifically for the longitudinal kind that shows up in high contrast areas and can't be easily fixed in post-process. As this phenomenon most frequently occurs at bright apertures, I'll only be testing the Sigma and primes here. Note that due to varying lens lengths, the perspective is slightly different for each model despite my best efforts to correct the positioning. As you can see, the Sigma and RF24 suffer from similar amounts of fringing wide open, but the Sigma clears up more by f2.8. At 35mm, the EFS 35 at f2.8 fares better than the Sigma and continues to do so until the Sigma almost fully clears up at f5.6. Note that the fringing for all of these lenses is reasonably subtle, and unless you're as sensitive to the effect as I am, you probably won't even notice in most situations. So what's the verdict on how the legendary Sigma 18-35 f1.8 art lens holds up on a modern mirrorless camera, and whether newer budget primes or even modern kit lenses might be better options? You've probably seen enough to draw your own conclusions, but I'll give my own opinions and recommendations based on my own experiences. In essence, whether the Sigma will be worth it or not depends on the value you place on a variety of factors. The image quality, or IQ, is indeed quite good even at f1.8, and held up to or even exceeded the other lenses tested here. That was particularly impressive against the primes, considering the advantage the flexibility of even a short zoom range holds. However, the lack of lens stabilization can be troublesome if your own Canon crop camera is not an R7, and this especially holds true for video. Speaking of video, the very loud autofocus and obnoxious effect when changing aperture could be a deal breaker for some, and alongside the size, weight of the lens, it's clear we are overdue a Mark II version of this lens designed for modern hybrid mirrorless cameras. Sigma has recently released a full-frame equivalent of this lens, so perhaps there is hope for a successor on the horizon. For now though, those of us looking for the brightest aperture zoom lens for our APS-C cameras will have to make do with this still very good option. But back to the verdict. As mentioned, the Sigma competes well with image quality, and the f1.8 aperture is a very compelling achievement, but it comes at the cost of significant size and weight penalties. The two primes tested here were much smaller and lighter, which alone made it easier for stable video, as well as transportation and extended wear. But they also had their own effective lens stabilization. I was surprised to see the RF 24mm consistently fall behind the Sigma in IQ, though not by much, and it fared a little worse in fringing too. It's still a nice lens, and I did prefer its bokeh over the others, but considering it also bears somewhat noisy and slow autofocus, in my opinion, it's a less compelling option over the Sigma for R7 users. R100, 50, and 10 owners looking for a budget lens for handheld video might think differently though. The EFS 35mm macro requires an adapter on R-series bodies, like the Sigma, but is still small and light, and with its silent focus, 1:1 macro, with unique built-in lights, and superior image quality at shared apertures, this thing competes well. There's quite a decent gap in light and bokeh between f1.8 and f2.8, however, and in my opinion, 35mm is a bit of an awkward focal length on Canon APS-C. So I would see this particular lens as complementing a Sigma 18-35 rather than replacing one. So how about the two kit lenses? Both exceed the zoom range of the Sigma while being significantly smaller, lighter, stabilized, nearly silent, and also come with bonus electronic features like the on-screen scale. Being significantly darker can limit their use in low light situations, however, and the variable aperture and external zoom is annoying for video work. The RFS 18-45 is also significantly behind in image quality, especially the corners, and will have a difficult time producing pleasant bokeh in most situations. The RFS 18-150 is only a little better in the bokeh and low light department, but its very wide zoom range greatly expands its utility. The image quality was also surprisingly good, even matching or exceeding the Sigma at many shared settings. I'd say there's still a place for the RFS 18-150 kit lens in many people's collections, but the 18-45 is simply superfluous, unless you really need a featherweight, minuscule when in storage mode, stabilized lens over all other factors. I hope you found all or part of this extended comparison useful if you were considering an EF Sigma 18-35mm for your own Canon R series camera, or were wondering how it would compare to a prime or kit lens. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comment, and/or subscribe.